Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to get started with our virtual program this afternoon, Latine History in Milwaukee County. And I'm going to do a little intro for everybody, and I'll turn it over to our speaker, Steve. So, with that being said, let's get started. Hi, everybody. We are excited to have both members and non-members here with us today. For those of you who don't know us, we are an independent, nonprofit historical membership society in Milwaukee. The mission of the MCHS is to recognize and preserve local history and promoting a greater appreciation of Milwaukee County's heritage. The Historical Society hopes to develop better understanding of the issues and challenges facing Milwaukee County today. The MCHS Museum and Research Center is located on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Drive in downtown Milwaukee. And throughout this series, we hope to touch on a variety of topics centered on Milwaukee history and culture. And we are going to have today's program. And the program today is called Latine History in Milwaukee, Los Primeros, 1910 to 1960. And our speaker today is MCHS Lead Archivist, Steve Schaffer. And I'm Olivia Hoff. I'm the MCHS Programs Manager, and I'll be hosting this program. So a couple of things to go over before we get started, a few reminders about using Zoom. Please keep your microphone muted. You can mute yourself by clicking the microphone button in the bottom left of your screen. There should be a red slash through the microphone. If you have a question, write your question in the chat. When writing in the chat, please make sure to select everyone as the recipient. And at the end of the program, we will have a question and answer session, and we will try to get through as many questions as we can. Also, this program is being recorded for MCHS members and friends of the MCHS who are unable to attend this program. If you do not want your likeness to be recorded, please turn off your camera. For the best viewing, please click the view button in the upper right-hand corner of your screen and select speaker view. Lastly, if you are having tech issues, please let us know in the chat and I'll help you out. And with that, I'm going to introduce today's speaker. Steve Schaffer has been a professional archivist for 12 years. He received his master's degree in library and information science from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in 2008. During that time, he has worked with many local organizations, including Milwaukee Archdiocese Archives, the Wauwatosa Historical Society, Marquette University, and many more. Steve has been with the Milwaukee County Historical Society as an archivist since 2014. His primary duties include assisting researchers and processing collections. So I am going to pass it over to Steve.
Having a bit of a technical difficulty here. Sorry about that. I'm gonna have to stop sharing for a minute. This is not working. All right. Oh, finally. Thank you very much. And my apologies for the feedback. That was all on me. My name's Steve Schaffer, and we are going to be talking about Los Primeros, a portrait of early Latine Milwaukee, 1910 to 1960. Ever since Rafael Baez first settled in the city in 1886, taking a job as music director at Milwaukee's Jesuit Church, Latines have helped to shape and are continuing to shape the city culturally, socially, and politically. According to a 2016 UWM report, Latinos are the fastest growing group in the city of Milwaukee, accounting for 90% of the population growth since 2000. And 39% of Wisconsin's Latinos call Milwaukee County their home. No brief presentation can fully capture the history and legacy of the Latina community. Our presentation today is not meant to be a comprehensive lecture, but rather to demonstrate how our collections link to work by scholars of Latina Milwaukee. Today, we hope to highlight the reasons why many Latinos choose to make Milwaukee their home and how they built a community. And this is a mural, History of Latinos in Milwaukee by Robert Cisneros. While this talk utilizes material from our own collections, mainly to call attention to the resources we drew heavily from a new group of historians and public history projects, all of whom are determined to document the lives of Latinos in Milwaukee, lives that have largely been overlooked in traditional archives for decades. Our discussion today would not be possible without the work of such scholars as Dr. Sergio Gonzalez, Dr. Teresa Delgadillo, the Wisconsin Latinx Historical Society, and the Somos Latinas Oral History Project. While part of our goal is to highlight what we have in our holdings, we also want to celebrate the scholars and voices who have deepened our understanding of the Latina community in the city. Rafael Baez, Milwaukee's first known Mexican resident, was a professional musician, composer, and eventually Marquette University's first Latina professor. Born in the state of Puebla, he studied music composition at the College of Arts and Industries in Mexico, showing a natural talent. Upon graduation, he found work as a professional musician, first as an assistant organist at the Metropolitan Cathedral in Mexico City, and later as a violinist in the Grand National Theater Orchestra. His talent caught the attention of the Hesse Grand Opera Company, and he was recruited for a national tour of Mexico in 1884. After the tour concluded, the Hesse Company offered him a job as the chorus master during a tour of the United States. When the tour of the United States ended in 1886, Baez decided to stay in the city in the United States and settled in Milwaukee. Baez first found work in the city as an organist and musical director at the Jesuit Church. Through the 1920s, he continued to work as a musical director and organist for several other churches and synagogues, reaching the full-time organist and director position at Milwaukee's St. John's Cathedral. Baez supplemented these jobs for congregations by performing concerts, as well as becoming private music coaches for children of the city's wealthier residents. Beloved by his students, this experience as a tutor led him to be offered a position as a music professor at Marquette College in 1892, becoming the first Mexican professor on the facility at what is now Marquette University. Baez had 4 children with his wife, Maria Catherine Schoen, one of whom unfortunately died in infancy. His remaining children, Raphael, Francis, and Mary, will be returned to later in this discussion for their contribution to the Latino community during World War II. The violence of the Mexican Revolution and the later Cristero War in 1926, as well as immigration restrictions in the 1920s, created a large migration of Mexicans to the United States. Over 1 million Mexicans escaped the violence by coming to the United States during this period. Many men and families would move across the border into the United States and settle further north. offers of work and limits on European and Asian immigration. That was the Quota Act of 1921, followed by the Immigration Act of 1924, created job opportunities in the United States. Pfister and Vogel leather companies sent recruiters to Mexico in the 1920s to replace existing striking unionized workers. It is critical to note that these mostly single young men were misled by the recruiters of Pfister and Vogel and did not know they would be used to break a strike. This generation of Mexican worker was known as Los Primeros, the first, and came largely from Tangansicuero in the state of Michoacan. Most men were hired on a seasonal 6-month contract basis and had to sleep in converted company buildings on site. This arrangement afforded them protection from potential violence by striking workers, but essentially controlled their movement. Other companies, such as the Alice Chalmer Company, also employed laborers recruited from Mexico and Texas. As historian Sergio Gonzalez notes, many of these early jobs were doing some of the most difficult and dangerous labor, such as placing hides into chemicals that would eventually irritate or burn eyes, skin, and lungs. Joseph A. Rodriguez suggests that Mexicans were paid less than their Anglo co-workers and were often the last hired and the first fired. You can see here in this company photo from 1924, the absence of Mexican employees is quite apparent due to the twin factors of short-term contracts and discrimination. Perhaps one benefit offered by the tanneries were English classes taught at the plant during breaks and after closing 3 nights a week. While the skills serve the workers in other parts of life, the goal really of these classes was to ensure that the workers understood their supervisors more clearly. As the single men made enough money to rent their own apartments or rooms in boarding houses near the Walker's Point area, the Mexican community began to create a more permanent presence in the community. Newspapers and Mexican residents began to speak of a Mexican colonia, of a local and a vocal and vibrant community. As a result, community merchants began to open grocery stores and other businesses to serve the new community. Arturo Morales, a former Pfister and Vogel employee, saved $2,150 and in 1925 opened the first Latine-owned grocery store in Milwaukee on South 5th. You can see there's Arthur Morales Rose grocery store, and it gives the 2 addresses. One was a house and one was the grocery store. Others like Luciano Haro also opened his grocery store in the 1930s. Here they offered familiar foods, but in addition provided critical community services such as something akin to a credit union where customers could make deposits and withdrawals. Such places became community spaces that would offer help and a taste of home. Businesses were not the only ways that residents helped to create a community. Mutual aid societies gave help to Mexican residents and provided a safety net, as well as sometimes providing events. But also the beginning of the Spanish language press began to emerge in the community and kept it well informed. These are 2 images from our Sanborn insurance map collection that shows the locations of the Morales and Haro grocery stores. We don't have images of the buildings themselves, but this will give you an appreciation of their location and actually close proximity to each other. The left image has a building marked with 3 blue dots. That's Arturo Morales' store at 273 Grove. That was what was 5th Street was called before. The address was converted to 611 South 5th Street in 1931. The map on the right has 2 buildings marked with 3 small circles. The one on the right side of the street is 250 Grove, the address for Luciano Hora's store. This address also was converted to 526 South 6th Street. The building on the other side with the blue dots is Arturo Morales's residence. So you can see how very close they live to each other. These are Milwaukee Fire Department photographs from the early 1930s. I picked them to kind of give an idea of the housing stock and the feel of the neighborhood. I didn't realize it until I grabbed these pictures that the structure on the far right of the left image, there's a vehicle parked underneath it, is a segment of Luciano Harrow's grocery store. So we have a picture almost. The first organized Mexican-led group was El Club Mexicano. It was founded in 1924, and it organized social events and often collaborated with other Catholic organizations, such as the Knights of Columbus. The group also rented the Knights of Columbus Hall for many dances as part of this cooperation. By 1930, a second social club, the Spanish Club, also organized in the city. At right is a photo of Juan Torre, who was president of the Spanish Club in the 1950s. Torre, a Peruvian, became a cultural ambassador of sorts for Latine culture in the 1940s. And he's worth introducing here because he will be featured a little bit later when we talk about the International Institute. Mutualistas were organized to help provide funds for new immigrants adjusting to life in Milwaukee. One, the Mutualista Hispano-Azteca, grew out of a drama club that performed plays in Spanish. In addition to offering supports and aid, these musical aid societies also organized cultural events, like the first Independence Day parade, the first Independence Day celebration on September 16th, 1930. In our Latino American collection, we have a letter from the 1930s from Hispano-Azteca's president inviting Mayor Hone to attend an event celebrating Cinco de Mayo at Harmony Hall. On the right is a newspaper article featuring a photo of children celebrating Mexican Independence Day in 1939. Whether organized by mutual aid societies or community members, social events proved an important part of constructing a sense of community and creating connections. In our archive, we have a poster for a Gran Ballet, a great dance held at Harmony Hall. It is interesting to note that the handbills and posters were bilingual, suggesting the events were widely welcoming. Historian Teresa Delgadillo also notes that the mention of women in this poster contradicts the widely held view that early migrants were mostly single men. Women were obviously present in significant numbers. This aligns with Sergio Gonzalez's assertion that chain migration, immigrants sending for their families when they became financially stable, was practiced by Mexican immigrants, just as it had been practiced by most every other immigrant community in Milwaukee. Social events put on by local Mexican community and mutual aid societies also provided a safe environment for the city's Mexican residents to be entertained. Oral histories conducted by Arnaldo Sevilla in the 1970s and analyzed by Sergio Gonzalez suggest that reactionary elements saw the presence of Mexicans in shared entertainment venues as a threat to the racial and social order of these spaces. At times, this led to white-initiated threatening or violent altercations that attempted to enforce an informal social exclusion policy. Juana Dañas, who moved to Milwaukee in 1927, indicated in an oral history that the Gem Theater was off limits to Mexican patrons. If Mexicans entered, they were violently attacked and ejected by white patrons. Racist whites who feared interracial relationships also might attempt to prevent Mexicans dancing with a white woman by starting a fight or some other disruption. Porfirio Gonzalez also recalled that if Mexicans went to dances with their white girlfriends, they were heckled by white racist residents, and sometimes this heckling escalated to fights on the dance floor. Again, we didn't have a photograph of the Gem Theater, but there's a picture. It's on Grove Street, and it's kind of in the middle of the of that block on the right. Oral historians suggest that these attempts to socially restrict and police the Mexican community were also informally institutionalized among some officers of the Milwaukee Police Department. Police were accused of biased behavior that favored whites in altercations involving Mexicans and whites. Mexican men were arrested on exaggerated charges of public intoxication or disorderly conduct when congregating at public events. Accordingly, Mexicans in Milwaukee began to feel mistreated and racially profiled by the police. This mistrust of the police among the Mexican community would continue into the 1970s. However, this distrust somewhat dissipated when the Milwaukee Police Department began to hire Latine officers in the 1970s. These conditions suggest that events like those sponsored by mutual aid societies and other groups not only celebrated Mexican culture and helped grow the social life in Milwaukee, they also offered a respite from racism they might encounter in other places, and provided Mexicans and other friends and companions from other ethnic groups into tolerant spaces to enjoy themselves. Excuse me. You may want to learn, or if you want to learn more about the activist efforts to hire the first Latino police officers in the city, and to provide outreach to the Latino community through efforts like the National Latino Peace Officers Association, check out Anthony G. Guillaro's book, Milwaukee Police and Latino Community Relations. One of the most important contributions of the mutual aid societies were to create the first Spanish language newspapers in the city. Originally from El Oro, Mexico, Federico Herrera moved from Texas to Milwaukee in 1927. Once in Milwaukee, Herrera became involved in the establishment of the mutual aid societies like Sociedad Mutualista Hispano-Azteca, and then began to produce newspapers in Spanish to keep the community informed. In the late 20s, Herrera helped launch the Sancho Panza and Bulletin newspapers and El Mutualista newspaper in 1930. The paper covers news, social events, and many other subjects. This August 16, 1947 issue of El Mutualista is from our archival collection. We had an intern this summer who helped us to translate those so that we can read them in English and in original Spanish. Another vital center of cultural life in Milwaukee was Our Lady of Guadalupe Mission Church. While we will discuss its role briefly to get a truly good understanding of how the church became the center of activism and community, excuse me, I would say check out Strangers No Longer, Latino Belonging and Faith in 20th Century Wisconsin by Sergio M. Gonzalez. That was one of the books that was at the beginning of the slide presentation. In it, he argues that theological principles of hospitality and obligation to the stranger have guided the church since its foundation, and these concepts helped create a sense of community and a base for social activism. Many of the early congregants were concerned by the anti-clerical war in Mexico, known as the Cristero War, and raised funds to help, to help Catholic refugees. The church offered support to striking farm workers in the 1960s and later helped provide sanctuary to Central American refugees in the 1980s. The creation of the church itself was an act of community and Catholic solidarity. Excuse me. When Frank Gross, a member of the Knights of Columbus, noticed Mexican members attending Holy Trinity Catholic Church, he decided to reach out, and he helped them found a Mexican branch of the Knights of Columbus called Club Mexicano, and helped them arrange to have services in Spanish and throw social events and provide aid to the community. As the numbers of Mexican parishioners grew, it was decided to form an independent church dedicated to the growing Mexican community. Archbishop Messmer covered the $9,000 cost in order to buy a building on Fifth Street, and the church was dedicated December 12th, 1926. And it is the area marked 3, the building marked 313 in the Sanborn map on the slide. After several relocations, the church still serves the community. These are some wonderful shots of the church at its 239 West Washington location in the mid-1950s. This is from our George Kushalik photography collection. Our International Institute collection is quite vast and contains reports, correspondence, newsletters, and services for immigrants through the late 20th century. Agnes Fenton's survey of Milwaukee's Mexican community in 1930 is interesting to researchers for several reasons. One, it captures a portrait of many Mexican community organizations in the city. But secondly, for those studying how Americans reacted to waves of immigration, it might be instructive. It was written by a white woman, and it often can appear to be condescending, coming from a place of paternalism that pressured immigrants to assimilate in the era rather than to embrace cultural differences. The stock market crash of 1929 and Great Depression created a crisis in the Mexican community. Only a quarter of the city's residents were able to retain work. 1 in 5 families were on some form of public aid. The Mexican community was hard hit because, as in other times, as companies struggled, Mexicans were often the first to be let go from jobs. This was largely due to the perception that they were temporary workers instead of what they were, members of the community. In an effort to reduce the strain on social services, Mexicans, regardless of their citizenship status or their children, were encouraged, in reality coerced, by community and immigration officials to return to Mexico. Local relief officials often worked with immigration officials to arrest and determine those who overstayed their visas or were determined to be public charges and then sent to courts in Chicago for deportation. Recent research by Marla A. Ramirez at UW-Madison using oral histories to understand how women and their children remember or experience the period suggests they were banished from communities in the United States because they were targeted for removal. Nationally, 500,000 to 2 million Mexicans were deported in this period. 60% of those were US citizens by birth or naturalization. This policy shattered families and reduced the Mexican community in Milwaukee. It was reduced from a thriving community of about 7,000 to less than 2,000 by 1933. For those interested, they came to toil. They came to toil newspaper representations of Mexicans and immigrants in the Great Depression, hand in hand with the so-called Mexican repatriation was biased coverage of the removals and deportations by Anglo news sources, especially newspapers. Dr. Melita Garza, an historian of journalism at the University of Illinois, has written a book about newspaper coverage of Mexicans during the Great Depression and the Mexican repatriation. She chose the 1930s because it was a pivotal period, not only in US financial history, but also in immigration history. Bear in mind that in 1929, it was not only the year the stock market crashed, but it was also the year that crossing the border without documentation became criminalized. Despite the devastation of the Mexican community, our archives show signs of resilience and resurgence throughout the 1930s. In the 1930s, the community held the first Mexican Independence Day in the city. In 1933, a Cinco de Mayo commemoration in Milwaukee was held at Harmony Hall and is commemorated by this program. Celebrations like these in a time of uncertainty with the threat of deportation looming shows the strengthening of a commitment to the community that remained. One of our collections that is rather unique to the society are naturalization records. And these were records that were from people who completed their documentation at the circuit court in Milwaukee rather than the federal court. At the time, you had a two-way option for naturalizing. That ended in 1941 when the federal government took over the whole process. So ours are from territorial times to 1941, but we do capture some of the Mexicans who naturalized in Milwaukee in the 1930s. On the right, and these, let me just say that these are really interesting records. They are from a bound volume. So there's a much larger sheet, but in the late 20s, early 30s, they began to take photographs, which are really impactful and great for genealogists and researchers in general. So these are examples from those records. So on the right, we have Felipe Garcia. He's listed as a laborer, and at the time of this photograph was living at 1806 North 10th Street. Ramon Romero worked as a musician, and at the time of this photo was living at 1856 North Oakland Avenue. On the left is Alicia Moreno, a housekeeper, and at the time of this photo was living at 531 West Virginia Street. Jose Gonzalez, a laborer, and at the time of this, and at the time this photograph was taken, was living at 9th and Carrollville Road in Carrollville, Wisconsin, which is now part of Oak Creek. It's a fair guess to say that Jose more than likely worked in one of the large paint or glue factories that used to operate in Carrollville. Now, these are especially interesting. These are repatriation, and these are petitions taken out by women. There were a significant number of women who naturalized after September 1922, thanks originally to the fight for the women's suffrage, the 19th Amendment. These applications to take the oath of allegiance were utilized by Latine women, and basically it meant that if you were married to an unnaturalized person prior to 1922, you also lost your citizenship. So potentially you could have been an American citizen, married somebody who was not a citizen, you immediately lost your citizenship. This happened to a lot of women who married Germans as well during World War I. But the great thing is a lot of women took it upon themselves to make sure that they had citizenship on their own and not relying on their male partner for that. And again, Latine women took advantage of this. These are two of them that we have in our collection I'm sure there are many more. And this is a very interesting immigration, Julius Paul Torres. And the way I found these in our naturalization collection, and I had to actively look for them, is to just search by Spanish surnames, and then these would come up. I mean, what we would like to do is an extended, comprehensive listing of Hispanic or Latine immigrants. But Julius Paul Torres is very interesting in that he was almost recruited. In fact, I think he was recruited. The two people who were his witnesses, it's hard for me to read, but it's D.A. Dole and James A. Mold, were his co-workers. And he was hired as a manager for this for a company. And it's very interesting to look at the addresses on this, because his co-workers lived about a block away from them. They lived on North 37th Street, which at that time was a fairly, good neighborhood, and clearly a comfortably middle-class neighborhood. So he's a very interesting person to note in these records. This is a photograph of Diego Eñez. He was, in this particular photograph, he's shown as the conductor of the Works Project Administration sponsored and Milwaukee-based Wisconsin Symphony. He emigrated from Oaxaca in 1915. He was one of three conductors for the Wisconsin Symphony, and he did a lot of the concerts in Milwaukee, and these would be concerts at traditional venues like the auditorium, or like theaters. But he also did a lot of them in parks, especially Washington Park with its shell. So you can see he's listed as a conductor, and this is a Pan American concert, so it featured other Latine performers. 500,000 Latine served in the United States Armed Forces in World War II. 3,500 of them were Mexican Americans. On the left, seated, is Milwaukeean Lieutenant Colonel Rafael Baez Jr. So that's Baez's son, chief of the Western Division Ferry Command in the United States Air Force. Thousands of Mexican women contributed during World War II as wartime factory workers, as nurses, as women, auxiliary units such as the Waves, as translators, interpreters, clerks, and many other roles. We have in our collection the paperwork that shows Mary J. Baez served as a clerk stenographer for the U.S. Navy. Here you can see some of the details, and that she had actually put her brother down as a contact. And on the right is her ration book. We also have a collection of National Defense Workers index cards that there are many. Anybody who is hired during the World War II to work in industry would be in those, and those also contain names of Milwaukee Mexican Americans. Rationing was a grim reality for fighting the home front battle. This is a ration card of Mary Baez, and we have thousands of these. It's one of the things that we probably don't accept anymore, because we have them in individual collections as well as our World War II collections. Another Latine resident of Milwaukee, Antonio Morales, recalled rationing in World War II while speaking to historian Teresa Delgadillo. And I quote, "There was always something. Sugar was rationed, everything was rationed, gasoline was rationed. You got a certain amount of everything. Most of my brothers went to the war and most of their friends went too. They all came back at different times. Nobody came back at the same time. We were just glad when they did come back." Not all of them came back, unfortunately. We know of 4 Latinos from Milwaukee who were killed in action during World War II. On the left, there is David Valdez Jr., and he was killed in action while serving as a gunner on a B-24 bomber in 1944. His plane was shot down over Hungary. Hector Cervantes served as a seaman second class and was killed in action while serving in the Navy. Salvador Flores died on June 9th, 1944, while serving in France. That was more than likely associated with the invasion of Europe, D-Day. And Arthur H. Quiros died while serving in the 93rd Armored Field Battalion in 1945. The Bracero program, a wartime measure that began in 1942, recruited 2,500 men every year, mostly from Mexico, but also from other places such as Jamaica. They were recruited as agricultural workers and sometimes as factory workers. Jamaicans were used by Alice Chalmers during World War II. The common images of Mexican migrants traveling seasonally in packed trucks or cars and rooming in cramped, dirty housing provided by U.S. farmers who needed work in the fields. While this is a correct image of the period for much of Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, bracero workers were more likely to work in machine shops or on railways. In 1944, 100 braceros worked in railway shops. 70% of them were married. They lived in converted warehouses, and they learned English at night classes offered by local public schools. In 1945, the number grew to 180 braceros. The braceros often faced exploitation in the fields and factories, especially regarding illness, injury on the job, and oftentimes there were forced name changes, and collection of pay could be a problem. On the right is a court-ordered name change entered in the U.S. District Court in Milwaukee. Now, that would be a federal case, but we have many of those also in our civil court cases. Not necessarily all forced, but it is a name change. They do have name change cases. With the Bracero program and post-war boom, the Mexican community in the city replenished and surpassed numbers earlier. A study conducted in 1950 found that 350 families, or 1,750 people of quote unquote Latin descent, lived in the city that year. Excuse me. Soon they were joined by 5,000 Puerto Ricans coming to the city to find work in the 1950s. These photographs, next coming up slides, these photographs are from, again, the George Koshalik collection, and he captured a slice of life for Milwaukee Latines. On the right, we have a shot of the Godinez grocery store at 611 South 5th, and with an advertisement for Spanish food. And on the left, we see a family carrying food home in the neighborhood. It's hard to locate that photograph exactly. We have a few more. On the left, the Texas restaurant, 608 South 6th Street. And on the right, La Perla Spanish Bakery and Tortilla Factory at 528 South 6th Street. Koshalik also took some striking photographs of Our Lady of Guadalupe during this particular photo session. And these are from the mid-1950s. So the League of United Latin American Citizens was founded in 1929 in Mexico to organize against discrimination against Latine in Texas. Locally, the Milwaukee chapter was founded in 1957. And in 1958, the Milwaukee branch hosted the first state convention in Milwaukee at the Wisconsin Hotel. The program is located in our collection. Alex Solis, president of the Milwaukee chapter 302, gave the welcome address. While coverage of the event is scant in local newspapers, the LULAC News from the 4th of March, 1958, and this was the official organizational newspaper, provided a summary of the minutes and the events. Unfortunately, the newsletter does not contain much information regarding local issues or the proceedings. The news paper claims that an April 1958 issue will cover the Milwaukee Convention, but it doesn't appear to have been digitized yet by either LULAC or the University of North Texas. The program lists the active officers of the Milwaukee chapter. We also have on file a delegate ribbon for David Serda, who was very prominent member from Illinois. And he was serving as the first Latine elected appellate court justice in Illinois. For any members of the league profession, I'm sorry, he was also the co-founder and first president of Mexican American Lawyers Association. Before we turn to talk about the growth of the Latine community in the 1950s, I would want to show you one more page of the convention programs. It shows a list of local Milwaukee restaurants and businesses that sent well wishes to the delegates. This shows both the expansion and the embrace of places that served and supported the Latine community. So we see next to the list of council members' names, you can see a number of these well wishes in support of the local Mexican community, either by restaurants and stores. In the second panel, you can see there is a claim and an advertisement for La Churrita tap that the Milwaukee chapter formed at the bar. Also note the ad for the Texas restaurant, which we just saw in an earlier picture. During the 1950s, more than 450,000 Puerto Ricans moved to the mainland United States, and some 5,000 called Milwaukee home in the 1950s. The Milwaukee Journal suggested the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel suggests that as of 2024, some 28,000 Milwaukeeans are Puerto Ricans. The first known Puerto Ricans were Juan Torres Batista and the brothers Pascal and Castillo Romero, who came to Wisconsin originally as agricultural workers. Initially, Puerto Ricans made their home on the east side near Kilbourne Avenue, but this area was targeted as blighted, and there were development projects, specifically like Juneau Village and road projects on Kilbourne that pushed the community to the River West area in the 1960s. Adequate and safe housing remained a concern for Puerto Ricans. Already American citizens, unlike Mexicans before them, they were pressured to assimilate and to conform to American folkways and language. In addition to language barriers, Puerto Ricans faced harassment by the police. Sergio Gonzalez has found that Puerto Ricans were arrested for playing guitars on their front stoops, and other small infractions perceived to be, breaking, violations of the peace. Sergio Ramos, a resident, recalled that police would follow him and his wife home to ensure they lived there. The solution to combat these problems by city government was to pressure them to learn English and learn local laws and defer to law enforcement. Largely, these efforts were conducted by in 1952 by the Puerto Rican civic community, which was formed by the city. However, this community did not address the actual conditions in which many Puerto Ricans live. As with other groups, Puerto Ricans began to organize clubs and organizations to help build a stronger social life and sense of political advocacy. Sergio Gonzalez noted that only one mutual aid society existed to serve Puerto Ricans. It was a group called Puerto Rican Democratic Organization, Inc., and it was formed in 1961. First to offer social events like dances and dinners, but by the 1970s, it had rebranded itself as the Puerto Rican Organization of Wisconsin, Inc., which helped to assist with political and economic needs. Many Puerto Ricans joined broader social movements in the 1960s and 70s to address the issues in their communities, but we will leave that for a later discussion. We will break this history into two parts. It's far too big to take on in one, so that things like this, La Raza and Puerto Rican nationalist movements will be dealt with in that installment. These are examples of citizenship manuals from 1954. This is from our International Institute collection. And these are interesting because they're in Spanish. This is a kind of a testament to the expanding and enriching Latina community in the 1950s. And it's also demonstrative of how the International Institute could help immigrants become part of the new community. Dante Navarro started the first Spanish language radio program in Milwaukee, La Hora España, on WFOX. It ran for 30 years and ending in 1982. Dante Navarro also became the first Latina to run for state assembly in 1970. He lost the election, but opened the door for others. You may have noticed the background of our presentation. It is the Hispanic heritage flag. And if any of you would like to look at that further in the recorded version, you can, but you can see the 8-pointed star, the light that shines our way, and the number of symbols in the flag itself. The geometric design is the American Cordillera chain of mountains stretching through North and South America, connecting peoples. Light blue is water and justice for everyone. Brown, we are a people of color. Green, earth and prosperity. Orange, the energy of our Hispanic community. The red is our family bonds and courage. And the light orange is the sacrifices of those that came before us. The dark blue, the sky above us all, and perseverance. I would be remiss if I didn't mention two more books on Mexicans and Latinos. The first on the left is Mexicans in Wisconsin by Sergio Gonzalez. It's kind of the definitive history. And the book on the right, Latinos in Milwaukee by Joseph Rodriguez and Walter Sava, is a wonderful book that has absolutely fantastic collection of photographs from the community. And it's really wonderful to page through it. And it's very informative. It'll give you a good, quick background on Milwaukee's Latina community. I just want to highlight some of our manuscript collections. The Baez family, Los Amigos de la Lengua, League of United American Citizens, United American Citizens, LaGuardia newspaper, and the Latino Hispanic American collection. We also have unpublished manuscripts. And these are things that were never published. They were written by individuals, Hispanics in Wisconsin, the Mexican and Puerto Rican migration to Milwaukee, some aspects of the life of Puerto Ricans in Milwaukee, Puerto Rican Institute, and then the survey of Puerto Rican community in Milwaukee's northeast side. And these are manuscript collections with references to the Latine committee. The naturalization records, of course, Milwaukee County institutional records, and this would mean things like the hospital, the tuberculosis Murdale, and the asylum, any of the schools that were at the county. Civil court cases, as I mentioned before, there will be name changes and any type of civil litigation that, and these are especially good for genealogists because it may shed some light they didn't know on about their ancestors. Milwaukee County departmental records, Milwaukee County supervisor records, and the last three, Pat Kuda collection. Pat Kuda was very active in the 1980s. He was somewhat of a center-right commentator. He wrote a lot and he collected a lot of newspaper articles, and he has a lot on, I believe it's the Hispanic folder. And his former mayor, Frank Zeidler, also has a lot of information on general Hispanic history and also some related to Milwaukee. It's especially strong on Central America and the movement of immigrants and the forced immigration of people from Central America. And then the Bugle American collection. Bugle American was it was a counterculture magazine, but it was really had strong writing, and a lot of the articles relate to the Latino community. Plus, they have a photo collection, which also hits on it. And lastly, we have some significant photograph. We have photograph collections with significant Latino representation. John Otis collection. These are from the 70s. John Otis did a lot of Bayview, but he also caught a lot of Walker's Point. Ray Chopre, again, Ray lived on 12th and Mitchell, so he took a lot of photographs of some of the changes that were going on in the neighborhood, but a lot of images of murals specifically that are probably no longer there. Lyle Oberweis collection, a lot of shots of Mitchell Street as it changed. Ted Rozamalski has some great shots of the Puerto Rican community in the River West area around Lloyd Street. MPS Parks and Recreation, and the Milwaukee County Board of Supervisors. Those are photograph collections, and they're wonderful. And we'll end on a photograph by John Otis that I was mentioning. So thank you very much for your attention. I hope I wasn't too clunky, and I guess Olivia will have some questions.
Thank you, Steve. We really appreciate the presentation, and I want to say we appreciate you guys joining us this afternoon. To respect everybody's time, I'm going to have about 5 minutes for a Q&A. So if you folks have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. If you think of questions later on, always feel free to head to our website and email our library. The emails are listed on our contacts page, or you can email Steve directly, and I'm sure he'd be happy to answer your questions or invite you to look at some of our materials. So if anyone has some questions, feel free to add them into the chat now.
And comments too, please.
Mhm. Juniper says, thank you so much for the presentation. Thank you for joining us, Juniper.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. No questions from Aaron. Thanks for joining us. Thank you so much, Anne. Yeah. course, it's our pleasure. We love to do programs like this and connect with folks virtually and in person. A nice thing about this presentation is it is going to be offered as a Speakers Bureau presentation. So Steve is a member of our MCHS Speakers Bureau. And what that means is that we go out to the community and present these wonderful presentations to different organizations, senior groups. So you guys can always feel free, if you have a group in mind that you'd like to hear this presentation, you can reach out to me. My email is on our website, and you'll be getting an email from me later today with the program survey. So always feel free to reach out about our Speakers Bureau as well. So last call for questions. Otherwise, we can wrap up. Alrighty. So I'm going to wrap up questions. If they come to you after, feel free to send them over in our email. I am dropping a link for our upcoming programs, so be sure to check out our website. And then I'm also dropping a link to fill out a survey to let us know how we're doing and any suggestions. Your feedback means a lot to us. It helps us make what we do better and helps us really connect with our community in a way that they see as fruitful. So I just want to say thank you so much for all of you attending, and thank you to Steve for this wonderful presentation. We really appreciate it. And stay tuned with our upcoming programs. We have a really great programs coming up next week. Our Pop and Pour After Hours event will be happening next Thursday, January 23rd from 5 to 7. That is an exclusive program for Museum Days. Museum Days is free admission from January 23rd to February 1st. Additionally, on February 1st, we have a really great program coming up called the Conservation Circle Fundraiser. That's where we are hosting folks here at the museum from 1 to 3 p.m. on Saturday, February 1st. And we'll be collecting donations for select objects from our collection that are in desperate need of some conservation services. So anything can help, from $5, $20 to $100 donation for these objects to preserve that history for as long as possible. So again, thank you all so much. And if you'd like to see more programs like this one, please consider supporting the Milwaukee County Historical Society. We recognize that Milwaukee history spans across diverse communities, ethnicities, and cultures, and we hope to continue to bring us all together through these programs. So thank you so much. And with that, thank you, Steve, for a wonderful presentation. Hope to see you all next month for our next virtual program series. Thanks, everybody.
So long.